All right, welcome everyone to our webinar, Optimizing Your Salesforce Org, 7 Critical Insights for High-Performing Salesforce Teams. We'll wait a few seconds to let people log in. A couple important things as we get started. You'll see down below the ability to use the question and answers. So as we go through the webinar today and have our discussion, you can enter in some questions there and we'll get those answered as we're moving through. All right, let's get things started. So let's get straight into introductions. I have with me here Susanna. Susanna, you want to give a bit of an intro?
Yeah, absolutely. Hello, everyone, and welcome as you're just coming into the room. If I haven't met you yet, or if we haven't seen each other online, my name is Susanna Plaisted. I am an architect evangelist at Salesforce, but before that, I was working at a large customer as a technical architect. I've worked with ISVs as well. So a lot of passion and interest in supporting the architect community. And I'm really excited about this report and all of the insights that are coming out of it. And it's an absolute pleasure to be here with you today.
Yeah, thanks so much for joining us, Susanna. I'm really excited about today's conversation. You've got Mike Bogan here. So I'm Director of Product Strategy at Hubbl. And so prior to Hubbl, I spent basically 1 month short of 9 years at Traction on Demand, which was a professional services partner of Salesforce. Helped growing them from about 20 people up to about 1,500 before acquisition to Salesforce, and worked all different types of roles. So was doing all kinds of project work, but also moved into and focused on solution engineering. So a huge amount of exposure into understanding the challenges that customers are going through and seeing all the different business models that everyone's digging into, and worked with hundreds and hundreds of customers in that sort of regime. And then moved into R&D and innovation at Traction. And there we were building products internally for Traction on Demand, but also in partnership with Salesforce. So I had some great opportunities to work with Salesforce on things like helping build the first version of the carbon footprinting that on the Salesforce platform that was Shenhua Su, myself, Patrick Flynn, building out that first carbon footprinting app that then turned into Sustainability Cloud, now Net Zero. Really exciting projects there. But today, what we're going to focus on is work that we've been doing over the last year and a bit, focused on getting an understanding of what's happening inside of our Salesforce orgs. And what's interesting about this, we're all kind of here to get an understanding of it. And one of the questions we always hear when we're interacting with people is, how does my Salesforce org compare to everyone else's, right? And the way we've always thought about this is everyone kind of lives inside of their own Salesforce org. And we're trying to rip open this paradigm where we're trying to learn from all the orgs in the ecosystem. And we're building a multi-org metadata analysis data set that allows us to do machine learning against that data set to provide insights that are actionable to everyone in the ecosystem, and really trying to raise things up. So on that note, what we will do is, as we discuss the results from the benchmark report today with Susanna, we'll also look at how we can make this actionable. We want you to learn from these quantitative and objective numbers that are out there, but hey, how do I actually use this in my day-to-day work and actually make this actionable? And if you haven't looked at the report yet, you can just grab that QR code and kind of follow along with us as you go, or take a look at it afterwards if you want. All right, so let's take a look at this first number, and we'll start with the big 24,000. So what does this actually mean? So one of the, like, if you think about it, just one of the really simple questions is, what is a Salesforce org, and what is the metadata in a Salesforce org? What we've seen from the hundreds and hundreds of orgs that we've analyzed is that the average number of metadata items in an org is around 24,000. And so that's, it's a big number. Well, like, what does this actually mean? Let's turn this into something that we can actually discuss and think about. So just doing a quick calculation. Hey, if I landed in a new Salesforce org and was going to try and understand what's happening in that org, if I went in and clicked on every single piece of metadata and looked at it for 5 seconds, it would take me 4 days of continuous clicking to get into this. And so this is where we recommend, hey, take advantage of some of the pre-built functionalities that are out there in the ecosystem that help you get ahead in that scenario.
Right. I think one of the interesting things, so this is insight number one, you can see on the top of the screen. And this insight really isn't necessarily, there's nothing positive or negative that is inherently attributed to this insight. Really, it's just that Salesforce teams, whether you're an admin or a developer, an architect, you are managing an immense amount of metadata. There's a lot. And I think for me, the takeaway here is not that that's good or bad. I think I love this sort of statistic that really brings this this insight to life, makes it really tangible, right? It's this much, like it would take you an immense amount of time to actually click through everything. And I remember back when I started using Salesforce, it was actually the way to learn, right? We didn't have Trailhead. We didn't have all these great things. The way to learn Salesforce was literally to click through the setup menu and open up the items and explore, okay, what's inside like this, this section. And I'm of course now blanking on the old sections of the setup UI, but that's how you used to learn, right? Because there was a manageable amount of things to work with. But as the Salesforce footprint and the Salesforce sort of landscape continues to grow exponentially, that's not possible anymore. And I like to tell that story because I think it applies here as well. As you use Salesforce, maybe you're just starting and you think, well, I can manage this. Like I know what's happening in my org. I can use an app or I can use just the setup menu to sort of see what's in my org landscape. But the fact of the matter is, as your application matures or as your practice grows, it's just not possible to understand your org or understand the metadata inside your org without having a better strategy. And for anyone who's familiar with Salesforce Well Architected, I will be referencing that a lot. That's what my team at Salesforce has built. It's essentially a way to understand how you should approach building a healthy architecture using Salesforce products. And it has great prescriptive guidance, and it's all around these frames of a concept around trusted, easy, and adaptable, if you're not familiar. And this insight really makes me think about how you need to make sure that you're designing an architecture that is easy to read. So easy for folks who are, maybe you're a new employee and you need to get up to speed fast, right? It's easy to read and maintain and actually live in and use. And in order to do that, you need to make sure that you're not relying, right, on that setup menu to click in and click through. You want to make sure that you have documentation and design standards and things that make it easy, whether you're leveraging awesome tools that make it easy to like go in and run a report, that's great. But I would say that my recommendation on top of this is to do something even extra. If you do run that report, that's awesome. Start to use that to compile an external, maybe metadata dictionary. Make sure that you have your solution overviews and documentation that doesn't just describe the metadata that exists, but it ties it to what it's supposed to be doing for the business, to those business capabilities. So you can really have a true understanding of what your org, what the metadata inside your org is intended to do. So I think that's my sort of recommendation on top of this great one that already is on the screen right now.
And I think you made this a great point there, Suzanne, too, around that journey into Trailhead and that transition of, hey, I'm trying to dig through setup, trying to figure things out. And then once Trailhead came out, now there's just so much capability to get in there and get an understanding of not only how to configure things and do things, but it just goes so much deeper to actually explaining the why around this. And just one quick question coming in is around like metadata versus data, right? So when we're talking about metadata here, what we're talking about is all of the, think about your objects, the custom fields in those objects, maybe the Apex classes in code, Aura, LWC, it goes on and on. There's all different types of metadata in there. We're not talking about that transactional data that's in the org, all the information that's inside of the records. You also need to understand that aspect of your org too. You need to get an understanding of what's going on with your data. But here we're talking specifically about the metadata, and we'll continue to go through as we talk. The benchmark report really focuses on that concept of metadata, the way your org is really configured.
Yeah. And it's important, I think, to note too, you can't assume that anything to do with org configuration is always stored as metadata. There's lots of
Yeah.
configuration, especially if you're using different applications, right? If you're using a CPQ, for example, a lot of configuration for applications is actually stored as data, which is a unique challenge. So knowing exactly by looking at, there's a great tool called the metadata coverage report. I think that talks about different types of metadata, what can be done with different types of metadata, and ensuring that you know the difference down to like each type of metadata is quite important as you get a more mature implementation.
Nice, nice. Okay, let's keep moving. So we got a sense we're looking at a lot of stuff, but one of the big themes that we've seen in the ecosystem in the last couple of years is this concept of the, like, honestly, it's the innovation that's coming out of Salesforce. So Salesforce is innovating so quickly. Now we have this incredibly powerful tool of Flow that allows us to do so much more than our legacy types of automation we're able to do. So for those who've been around the ecosystem for a while, you've got workflow and process builder were very common types of automation that were built on the platform. But Salesforce has moved on because they've been innovating so much into Flow. And the idea here is let's get an understanding of where everyone stands, where the ecosystem stands with regards to this migration of Flow. From the orgs that we've looked at, we've seen 14% of the declarative automation is migrated into Flow. There's a huge amount. This is not accounting for Apex triggers and all the custom code that we'll get into later on. Just looking at that comparison of declarative versus the declarative workflow and process versus Flow. And so this number, this is honestly, we're just measuring and getting understanding. And what's interesting is we've done this over the last year and a bit. And what we've seen is we saw a 2% increase over the last year. And so this seems like a small number, the 2%, we've only gone up 2%. But if you look at it from the perspective of going from 12% to 14%, it's actually a pretty big jump. And there's been a big investment in people making that movement to Flow. But that said, there's lots of room to grow here. And the way I look at this is it's really exciting because it means that there's a huge amount of untapped potential that people can dig into here. And if you look turning this into something that is a bit more tangible, what you can do is the well-architected team has run some experiments that show you how much faster Flow is than workflow and process builder. And so if you're using these before save flows, what we found is that over 50% of the orgs that are out there can save over 100 hours just in the time that users are waiting for records to save, or if you think about if you've got a call center, for example, and customers are interacting with an agent in the call center, if you migrate your workflow and process over to Flow, your org's going to be performing much more quickly. And this is all good news for us.
Yeah. I love, so we're really talking about two topics here, which is important to unpack. So we're talking about the fact, right, that we're moving towards Flow in general at Salesforce as an investment in our declarative automations. And we sort of said, I feel like that's been in like the zeitgeist for a while, that we're like, that Flow is the future and all this great stuff. But I think it's finally coming to a head because we've started to see as of winter 23, that we've now blocked the creation of workflows. So as of winter 23, you can no longer create workflows. So that's, I think, made it very real for people that we are starting now on this phased approach of, we've publicly end of life to EOL'd, process builder and workflow. What's coming next with that is that in the summer 23 release, we're going to start blocking the creation of process builder processes. So if those are your go-to skills, because that's what you know how to build, I think probably some of the reason you're starting to see some of that small uptick is that people are anticipating that like we're going to need to still meet requirements of our business users to automate things,
right,
but we're not going to be able to use those tools that we're familiar with. I think so that's one very real thing that's happening, and that is resulting in, I think, people starting to need to think about this technical debt that's going to be coming. There is no date by which Salesforce is saying we're no longer going to support Process Builder and workflow. I think because in general, Salesforce is very, I think is very generous or lenient in the fact that we like to support the things that people are using. We don't like to just turn something off and not have it backward compatible, but we are moving towards the end of life of these products. So I think that thinking about how to then frame this technical debt that's going to arise by this fact is going to be something that, especially architects, I think admins are maybe going to have to think more about the physical, like how are we actually going to migrate these things? But the plan for how do we then work in this technical debt to a project, to an existing implementation is something that is going to become really important. And if you have read Salesforce Well Architected, you'll likely know that technical debt should not just be a concern or priority for technical teams. It needs to be a priority for technical and business users. It should be, you need to think about technical debt in a way that's important to sort of both sides of the house. And a great way to start to do that is to measure the sort of cost benefits or the downstream effects, right, of action versus inaction. And I love how we sort of then took this as part of the study that was done, that we could then actually put some, not KPIs, but measurements around the benefit that you're going to gain as a business by migrating these things. So it's not just, there's this huge sort of roadblock that's coming from a technical perspective, and we need to plan and make time to do this. It's also going to benefit the business at the end of the day. So I think really thinking about technical debt and how you're managing technical debt, this is a great time and an inflection point to take a step back and think about that from a program or project level. And then to also think about road mapping. So how do you start to work in good road mapping practices so that you have a roadmap for your Salesforce implementation that aligns and also keeps in mind the roadmap of Salesforce? I think that's incredibly important as well.
Yeah, and that piece, like speaking to the architects and the admins about, hey, this is changing. There's that whole, for me, is this piece of how do I speak to the business about this? And so this article that I published in Salesforce Ben, what it's doing is it's actually translating what the impact is in the org if you actually do migrate to Flow, how much more efficient your org will actually be, and you can use those numbers to then communicate up into your executive stakeholders. And so obviously, if you're we know this is all coming. And if you internally are having a difficulty making a decision of, hey, but workflow and process, it just works. It already works. So why do I need to migrate it? Really start thinking about this from the ROI perspective, as you mentioned. And we can even leverage our own Hubbl Diagnostics Essentials product allows you to get this calculation where you can get an understanding of the amount of time you can save in your org from migrating that workflow and process into Flow itself.
Yeah. And I would say, and also you can think beyond just this, great time save. Someone might say, well, my org works fine already. Like we're not having issues with performance, so I don't really care. There's other considerations to keep in mind as well. Things like the fact that Process Builder, I believe, only runs in system context. So you don't have a lot of fine-grained control around what sort of permissions and access this automation engine that runs has. With Flow, you have a lot more fine-grained control with that. With Apex, you have the most control over that. And also thinking about how to control, and I know we're going to talk about this in a little bit, but around how you control when things run and getting more fine-grained control so that you are playing nice with the order of execution so that you don't have any unexpected things. So there's a reason why we are deprecating Workflow and Process Builder for additional reasons as well. So you're going to gain a lot of additional benefits, and I think mitigate risks that are going to arise if you continue to leverage these now soon to be deprecated tools.
Yeah, and I think another piece there is if you think about if you're maintaining an org that has workflow and process and flow and all these other things, so now you're maintaining these different types of automation tools. If you're onboarding new staff, you don't want to have to train them in this legacy automation that is then going away. So it just becomes more efficient to focus on the flow, for example. We've got a question around, so how should we actually prioritize and begin our migration to Flow? Any thoughts on that one, Susanna?
Yeah, so I would say that you should start early. So start now, so that you can have a long runway to test, if you need to build up that muscle and actually learning how to build Flow, obviously start that sooner rather than later. Definitely don't try to delete your flows, or your workflows, don't try to get rid of those things. Start to deactivate. And then I would say start to build potentially those replacements, but I would make a strong recommendation to avoid doing sort of a lift and shift of all your workflows into, new flows. I would say the place to start is to take a step back, evaluate what's actually happening with all your workflows and your process builders, evaluate if all of that still needs to happen, because especially in orgs that have been around for a while, things just sort of start building on top of each other, and you might not even need all of these automations that are happening, or you might be able to optimize them into maybe one flow that handles a certain thing, or maybe it doesn't necessarily belong in a declarative automation for one reason or another. So definitely overall recommendation is to take a step back, do an audit of what exists, make sure it's documented, make sure you understand why everything's happening, and then figure out the most sort of direct path in engineering to choose the best replacement tool, and then start to build that out in a sandbox and test.
Right. Perfect. Okay, let's keep moving. So insight number 3. So this one's focusing on install packages. So the easiest way to think about this is, you can go to the App Exchange and you can install a package in your org from the App Exchange. That's installing metadata into your org. Other packages, developers can create a package that you can install that's not on the App Exchange that can also go in your org as well. And this one's I find really interesting. I find it really surprising, but also sort of not surprising at the same time, which is a weird thing to say. So what we're seeing is that 99% of the orgs have an out-of-date installed package, and around 14 of those packages are out of date per org. And so how do we determine this? It's basically because we have this multi-org data set, we can look at all the versions of the packages that are out there. And if we see a package that has a newer version available compared to the one that's in your org, then we can flag that as a new version of that package. And if you slice into this, you can see on that chart on the left that there's a chunk of packages that are out of date, but we're also seeing packages that are out of date, but also not security reviewed. And so these are ones where you want to dig in. I recommend just taking a look at the packages in your org. You can do this manually. You can go in and you can search and find all the App Exchange apps or packages that are in your org, and you can look at them up on the App Exchange. Just be aware that sometimes it's manually updated, so the version number is not up to date. But for those private ones, you need to actually just reach out to the developer to understand what versions are available. And then, or you can do it automatically. So Hubbl Diagnostics gives you the ability to just get a quick scan of your org and understand and flag those packages that are actually out of date.
Yeah, so definitely. So I think this one, like the others, maybe inherently there's not so much good or bad, but it's about how you understand this, right? So
right, exactly.
For managed packages, right, there's 2 ways essentially to get updates, and it depends on the package provider, how they are set up to either push or not push those updates to their customers. So as a managed package ISV, you can choose to ask the App Exchange, say, I want to be able to push my updates to my customers, which in and of itself comes with a fair amount of risk, right? Because we know that ISV builders can't necessarily know the intricacies of every single customer application, but they do have the ability to either schedule out push updates or to test out push updates with subsets of customers. But for the most part, from what I've seen, and maybe this data supports this, a lot of managed packages don't actually take on that challenge for a number of reasons, right? It's hard to know. You don't want to put your customers at risk. So for a lot of your managed packages that you have, you need to manually upgrade those packages. Another sort of wrinkle to that, right? So when you want to upgrade those managed packages, you obviously need to do your due diligence and do your testing and your sandboxes. You need to understand what's changed with that managed package. The other thing, Mike, that you mentioned is that there's some managed packages or some packages that have not been security reviewed. One pattern that we're seeing more ISVs take is a combination of using both managed and unlocked packages. So essentially being able to have your managed package and then have an unlocked package that maybe supports customer specific functionality. So it would be good if you are entering in a new org to understand like, why did we, so this is coming back to a little bit of documentation is so important. It's, why did we choose this application in the first place? What are the elements that we're using? If there is an unlock package, why did we, there might be a very good reason why there is not security reviewed package. Maybe there was a specific reason why we chose to install that, and really understanding that is really important. If you do need to do that digging, I would say once you've uncovered that, definitely document it. And then this is also a little bit of that technical debt. So understanding, right, how do you prioritize and work in because this is updating a managed package would be considered, in my opinion, a piece of technical debt that you need to work into your release, right? You need to test this alongside the other new functionality that's getting released. So by upgrading this, do you get access to new functionality that your business is going to use? Or is it truly just something that we need to do because maybe it's, you want to have the most up-to-date release that includes, XYZ security enhancements. They're using new patterns that are encouraged by Salesforce. Also understanding, so especially as an architect, understanding the difference between your major and minor and patch releases so that you can speak with, you can't just sort of blanket say, well, upgrading to this new release is going to increase their security. Like you really want to understand what's going on in the new release. And then I think the final thing I'll say is that going back to well-architected, thinking about your standard versus custom approach and the way you think about the build versus buy continuum is really important. And it's not always, I think we used to say like, obviously you want to use standard when you can. If you can't use standard, check out the app exchange. If you need to build your custom thing, but there is more nuance than that. I think you need to make sure that you evaluate your long-term app maintenance savings. So like, I'm going to save so much money by not having to maintain my custom solution, but you need to also weigh that against your recurring costs for that subscription-based app and make sure that you're actually using the majority of it. I think I see a lot of customers who have this recurring monthly subscription or yearly subscription, whatever, and they're using like this much of the managed package. So understanding that and really making those decisions, documenting them is so important as well.
And so if you want to get a quick view of what's going on in your org with regards to packages, you can use the free essentials version of Hubbl Diagnostics, and it'll give you a quick view of those identifying the packages that are out of date, but also which ones are security reviewed. And just as a high level point, everything that's on the App Exchange is security reviewed. So if you're installing from the App Exchange, everything's security reviewed. It's all great. All right, if we're looking at insight number 4, so moving on, this is this concept of let's move into now the objects at the object level automation and what's going on there with regards to the automations that are on top of those objects. So what we've seen here is that out of the native standard objects in Salesforce, about 47% of them have multiple automation types on them. And so by that, we mean things like flow, workflow, process builder on top of them.
Do you mean only, so question, do you mean only declarative automation types?
Declarative automation types. So, well, this includes triggers as well. Sorry, okay. It does include triggers. And then on custom objects, it's actually a little bit lower. It's at 14%. And that one, those two numbers, it's interesting. It actually gets back to a comment you just made around people not using parts of installed packages, because you get a lot of custom objects installed from those installed packages. So sometimes there's not a lot of extra automation built on top of them. But let's focus like right in the middle of that 16. If you just look at the 3 most used objects, case, account, and opportunity, we're seeing the average number of automations on each of those is around 16 different automations. And if we can break this down, this chart here is showing you the automation types that are on each of these objects. So you see the big red bars, that's the workflow. So it's the historical legacy automation. The yellow one's process, and then you've got flow in blue, and the gray being the triggers. And so what we're going to see over time is we're going to see the red and yellow bars decrease, flow is increase. We're actually already seeing flow increasing, and Apex is probably going to be around the same. And the recommendations here around, like Susanna has been saying all along, we need to catalog, we need to document, get an understanding of what's happening inside of our orgs. If you've got multiple triggers on top of objects, there's some nuances with around how those triggers are firing. You might need to put a framework in there. We want to look at how you can leverage a migration to workflow and process to an opportunity to do that true business analysis and actually make sure that you aren't lifting and shifting like you mentioned. And then of course, leveraging the innovations that are coming out of Salesforce like Flow Trigger Explorer.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is so we're not necessarily saying with this, right, that having multiple automations on an object is a bad thing. So I think that's important to point out. So, but what we are saying is that you want to make sure that you're thinking very carefully about how you design a well-architected solution for automation. And there's a couple of principles that you can leverage to do that. So you want to make sure that you have really clear logic in what you're trying to automate. So you understand the business process. You're automating only things that are going to actually provide value. Because I think what this insight does highlight is that having like everything, there is a inherent cost to any customization. There is a cost that you pay to maintain that, to make sure that to test that every time you release new functionality, to do regression testing on it, all of these things. So I think being really careful about what you choose to automate and automating things that are truly going to add value to the business, and then make sure that you're measuring the value that your automation provides so that you don't continue to just automate things because that's how you've always done it. And I think that you need to make sure that you're really thinking about too, using the most simple path in engineering. So using automation to simplify how you actually design your solutions. So by that, I mean, not necessarily trying to push everything into Flow because Salesforce says Flow is what you should be using and Flow is the best, and use low code whenever possible, which is true. But a priority above that is to make sure that you're using products to do the things that they're best at doing. So you're not turning yourself into a pretzel and doing this really like hacky flow just because you're avoiding using Apex. The direction that Salesforce is moving in, as you can see from the way the products are maturing, is by moving away from these recommendations like one flow per object. Like that's definitely not, I know it's still published some places, that is not a recommendation. That's a recommendation or an anti-pattern that you will see in well-architected. Trying to shove everything into one monolithic flow is not a best practice. And by the same token, trying to only use flow on an object because that's a mandate that came down is also not a best practice. There's great sort of elegant ways now to leverage Apex and flow together. And I think there's a big shift that's already started to happen where I think even folks like maybe developers who only know how to do Apex and know nothing about flow, that skill, that maybe not stereotype, but that like way of thinking is slowly changing. And I think folks across the board, sort of admins, see value in understanding a little bit about invocable Apex. Developers need to know that you can invoke Apex from a flow and start to see those patterns and when that makes the most sense to leverage. So I think we're going to see more sort of cross-pollination between all of these tools. And thinking about automation as, I love that you did this in this report, you're saying automation includes all these things. It's not just flow. It's not just declarative automation. It's Apex and code or automation as well.
Yeah, and it's interesting, depending on the history of your org. If you have an older org, obviously you were leveraging like these red bars, like it's not necessarily bad. You were leveraging the innovation that existed at the time, which is incredible, right? And so now it's this movement towards Apex and flow together to get things going. And obviously, depending on who, the resources that are in your organization, depending on which consultants you may have worked with, the weighting to one versus the other can be different. And so one way to get a quick view and get an understanding of what's inside of your org. So this is a view of Hubbl Diagnostics Essentials where you can take a quick view across your case account and opportunity, get an understanding of the different types of workflows or types of automation that are on all of those objects, broken down by whether they're namespaced or not as well. But even deeper, this view is really powerful to we go back to that very first thing we were talking about, all the metadata in the org and trying to understand the metadata. Here's a view that gives you all of the different types of automation on top of that object, whether they're active or not, and when they're actually firing. And this is a really powerful tool for architects to dig into to help understand where they need frameworks and where they can start invoking these different types of Apex coming from flows themselves.
Yeah. And I don't know this, I'm sure this is a fictional customer that we're looking at, but I would like the first thing looking at this for 3 seconds is, what is happening with this customer? They're not leveraging before updates, any before inserts, those fast, what do we call it now? Fast field updates with Flow.
Right.
Because that's definitely like all those performance gains that we saw on that other slide, that's from before insert, before update activity. So
yeah, and it's a great, we see it with a lot of the historical orgs because it wasn't even available at some point. So we see a lot of those historical orgs, and you're right, this is a fictional customer. But the other thing you can see here is if you look at triggers, you can see there's multiple triggers firing on after insert, and that's a scenario where there can be some random firing where you might want to build a framework around those triggers to control the processes there. But let's keep moving. So insight 5. So this is around digging in. Let's dig into those objects. So now we were talking about the objects, the automation on top of them. Let's look at the fields. What we've seen here is about 10% of the custom fields that are made on the account, case, and opportunity are empty. And so one way to think about this, one of the beautiful, amazing things about Salesforce is you can literally build whatever you want in terms of the fields and the way you can store your data. And this and people leverage this in so many ways. But we're seeing that when people actually build these custom fields on the objects, we're actually getting a scenario where they're actually leaving them empty. And so this is a scenario where we want to actually leverage those, actually dig into those and actually see where we can find fields that are empty and replace them, because they're basically making your org more inefficient.
Yeah. And I think this is more of I would think of this as a symptom. So seeing these custom fields empty, I would want to understand what's really going. So why are these empty? Again, is it like a custom, is it a managed package that installed custom fields that we never intended to use? Or does it point to a larger issue, maybe around something like adoption? So when we think about, again, bringing it back to well-architected, when we think about building a solution that's easy to use and is engaging for users, so making sure that folks are actually using the awesome solutions that you're building is incredibly important, because if they are not spending time and using the application the way you think they are going to use it, that can obviously have downstream effects. If you are making decisions, if you are automating other systems based on the data that should be being input into these fields, and that's not, that can obviously have some pretty significant effects. So I'd definitely want to love the advice of, yeah, maybe this is a chance to optimize your system, free up some fields so that you aren't hitting those governor limits of number of fields, but also before you just, maybe as an admin or as a technical person, before being like, I know that, we should clean this up, it's going to be great. Really step back and understand, why are they empty? And are there other things to consider as well?
Right. And this is obviously one where you can leverage Hubbl to take a look at your field utilization there and get an understanding of what's going on with those fields. But let's keep moving into the
and I do think we have, just one quick question. So we've used the opportunity, I think, account and contact as examples a lot, but can you run the diagnostic on custom objects?
Yes, so that's a great question. Yeah, so you can run Hubbl diagnostics against all of the custom objects in the org. You can look at namespace versus non-namespace. There's all kinds of filtering that's there. In the essentials version of the product, so the free version, if you just went on the site and signed up right now, we give you access to the case, account, and opportunity, so you can get the maximum value right away. All right, so digging into security. So what we've done is as we look at the metadata in the org, we run these org analysis across them to identify security issues that are in the code. And to be clear, this is not security issues in the Salesforce platform itself. This is custom code that people are putting into their orgs. And what we found is that there's a very large number of security issues that are uncovered and flagged from the PND analyzer and ESLint. These are open source code analyzers that allow you to uncover the issues that could be hiding inside of your code. And so the recommendation here, of course, is to dig into your org, looking at it from a well-architected perspective, and really get an understanding of the past code that's in your org, and getting an understanding of those out-of-date install packages like we talked about earlier. They could be harboring some of that out-of-date code. And to go even further, you can go into these additional layers of trust that Salesforce provides in terms of Salesforce Shield and event monitoring to really stabilize your org itself. And you can also see here that one of the things we see is that the older code, you can see the API versions here. That's like the age of the code when it was first put in the org. If it's not updated, you can see how old that code is. We're seeing around 10% of that code is over 10 years old, and it's housing all kinds of security issues in there as well. Any thoughts on that one, Susanna?
Yeah, I think just in general, this is a great call out to the fact that anytime you are sort of choosing standard versus custom when you're advising a customer, or if you're a partner and you're implementing, being just really thoughtful about the fact that it might be an easy thing it might be a couple lines of code, it might be, easy to solve a requirement by just going custom, by creating like a new UI, which is incredibly, I think, requirement that comes in a lot, like, oh, I wish the field was over here. So, a well-intended developer is like, oh, I can create a Lightning Web Component and put the field over here, and it's great. But remembering that, like, anytime you're introducing custom code into the platform, you're taking on that additional risk. So I think this is a great illustration of it. And I'm sure that, using these tools, or using any other tool, you can like dig in deeper and see where you would need to potentially change some of that code. But yeah, huge risk. Definitely something, again, thinking about a maintainable system, but also we're sort of shifting into security, and security should be your number one priority as an admin, an architect, a developer. Like, that is where you should start. So I'd say these two insights are at the end. I would probably, maybe they're at the end so you remember them, and these are the ones you take away with you, because these are the most important ones. So yeah.
Yeah, and this is honestly, it's so important that what we've done is we've made Hubbl Diagnostics Essential available to anyone. They can sign up, scan their org, and you get a completely free custom code security review. You can see, you get a breakdown of the frequency of the issues that allow you to dig in, and that gives you the ability to understand all of the issues inside of your code.
And we have a question in the chat. Do we have some examples of some of the things maybe that Hubbl can point out, or what you've seen from the report?
Yeah, so even if you just look in this this screenshot here, you can see things like the SOQL injections are a common issue where basically allows a hacker to take over a query and access data in your org that they shouldn't really have access to. There's things like the cross-site scripting vulnerabilities. Those are also exposed inside of these scans. And you can dig into each one of these different issues that you uncover. You can dig in deeper. There's a really important point here, is that we actually touched on it earlier, is trailheads. So there's some really powerful trailheads that focus on security in custom code, and how you can uncover what types of issues there can be and how you can address all of those. So definitely dig into those trailheads as well. There's another question here around the key differentiators between Hubbl and the scans and readouts that Salesforce Premier Success does. I think, like, one thing from my perspective is I believe the Premier Success is an annual review of the orgs, and Hubbl is something that you can scan basically anytime you want. There's definitely some differences with regards to the way you can see. What we're trying to do is we're trying to make it so that you have executive level visualizations that you can have conversations about as well. And I think a lot of tools, and Premier Success is definitely one thing you can dig into, but there's also lots of other tools out there that just provide you lists of metadata. We're trying to make this more of a conversation around what's going on in the org. Any thoughts there?
Nothing to add. No.
Cool. Okay, let's move into data. So this is the last one. We've talked about metadata, and this one here is, think of it as the metadata that controls who has access to your data, right? And so this one's just really simple and really critical. We're seeing that the average orgs has a lot of assignments for modify all data and data export permissions. Modify all data is one where if a user has access to modify all data, they can do, like, for example, if a sales user had access, they can modify their quotas. They can they can modify all kinds of things that they shouldn't be allowed to modify. So this is one you just need to get into your orgs, get an understanding of who has access to those powers, and review those profiles and permission sets, define policies to address those. And then the other piece here, of course, is that we're moving towards a permission-based approach. And so it's definitely time to start architecting and thinking about that perspective.
Yeah. And I would just add here, really, there's actually two sort of aspects to think about. So there's multiple different levers to control who sees what, who can access your data, and who can do different things with different objects in Salesforce. So one piece is controlling who has access to the metadata. So that's what someone can do. That's where we think about things like permission sets and profiles. So can someone actually read, or excuse me, does someone actually have access to opportunities at all, right? Does someone have access to those objects? So what they're authorized to do, essentially, with permission sets, no, not so longer with profiles in the near future.
Right.
My tidbit around permission sets is to, and this comes from the product owner, product manager of permission sets and that whole area, which is Cheryl Feldman. And the way she thinks about it, and I think it's a great way to think about it, is that permission sets should be organized as jobs to be done. So what do you actually need to be able to do? Do you need to be able to read contracts? Do you need to be able to, like, what are the things you need to do? And then you group those individual permission sets into something called permission set groups. And those should be sort of represent your personas. So contract users might need a whole different subset of permission sets. And the reason why to think about structuring this way is because you can then add, and we're thinking about all the new innovations coming with Salesforce, you can layer into your permission set groups something called muting permissions. So you can essentially extend the usage. You don't end up with like 50 million permission sets. You can actually have really purpose-built permission set groups that have very fine-grained access or no access to specific
Right.
types of metadata. All of this to essentially achieve what we call the principle of least privilege. So essentially giving someone the least amount of access that they need to do their job, but no more than that. And that's a security best practice. And that can be applied. So that's sort of talking metadata. But on the other hand of the side, we're thinking about data security, and the tools that we have to secure our data in Salesforce are more around org-wide defaults, right? So making sure that you can give maybe that permission to a user, or the org-wide defaults to a particular object, so that we are not giving public read write, for example, to everyone, right? You're not giving public anything to your external users. You're making sure that you sort of follow the simplest path to the principle of least privilege with both those metadata levers and also the data levers.
Nice. And so you can definitely get a view into your profiles, permission sets, and permission sets groups with Hubbl Diagnostic Essentials. Allows you we highlight some of the risky ones just so you can get in there and get an understanding of how much risk there is in your org right away, and review whether those are something that you need to get a handle on. So we've talked all along of all different types of metadata. We can't go through every single type in a conversation like this. It will take us even longer, of course. But really, Susanna's mentioned throughout, this is all about getting to a place where Salesforce has brought forward the concept of well-architected and getting solutions that are trusted, easy, and adaptable. And Susanna, if you want to expand a little bit on sort of where our well-architected is coming from and where things are going. It would be really
absolutely
for everyone here.
Yeah. So if you haven't heard of Well Architected yet, that's okay. So it's not been around for that long. We released it in August of 2022, so around Dreamforce time then. And it was created, this framework essentially was created to take some of the guesswork out of architecting healthy solutions. And with Salesforce, you're probably familiar, we're always big on our core values. We talk about one of our core values is trust. Well, with Salesforce Well Architected, we sort of ventured to establish essentially across all of our architectural implementations. We know that there's so much variation, right? Every customer is different, every architecture is different, but that doesn't mean that you're not sort of seeing these reoccurring patterns. And we believed that you could sort of set a set of core values that relate to architecture that you could then apply to the way you step through your architectural and design thinking to make sure that you're not forgetting about anything, to make sure that you're prioritizing the right things. So everything in the Salesforce Well Architected framework that you can see on the screen is in priority order. So, trusted, you can see inside trusted, there's secure, compliant, reliable. Inside easy, there's simple, automated, and engaging. And inside adaptable, there's resilient and composable. All of these things are in priority order. So as you attack sort of what to, you've got these great 7 insights from this webinar. How do you prioritize what you're going to act on first? I would recommend maybe starting with the things that we've covered last, that trusted pillar. Like that's where you really want to make sure that you spend your immediate time, because you could have like the coolest automations. But if you have a security vulnerability, then your folks aren't going to use your system. They're not going to trust your system. You might not be able to trust the data that you're getting in. So it's really the purpose of Well Architected, again, is to help guide your architectural thinking in a really structured way and to make sure you're using your time in the best possible way as an architect. And then what's coming. So right now we have the framework, the structure. We have white papers that correspond to the 8 topics that you can see on the screen, that like secure, there's a white paper, compliant, there's a white paper. And these white papers contain patterns and anti-patterns and really opinionated thinking about how we think that you should be approaching specific problems. That's sort of a first for Salesforce. Usually we put out a lot of great documentation. We have Trailhead, which is amazing, but we don't often sort of state our opinion on like, you should take this approach and here's why. In these white papers, we do take that stance. So that's, I think, very important. They are fairly dense. So definitely go in knowing that. When we talk about what we're looking forward to be doing, we're trying to make it easier for you to access the insights in these white papers, because they're not a quick read. There's lots of great technical detail. So we're going to be creating some tooling, some ways to get insights quicker out of Salesforce Well Architected in the future. You'll see some of these maybe announcements around Dreamforce time. But I know that we already have great partners like Hubbl who are starting to do some additional maybe tooling that might make approaching these white papers even easier. So maybe I'll pass it back to you for that.
Yeah, and the content I can't drive it home enough. The content on Well Architected it's so incredible. And you see the layers here, and it's actually broken down. Like if you go into secure, there's multiple layers that dig in. There's 4 levels that you can dig down into in terms of how it's all organized. And I remember there was kind of like a pilot conversation around this at the Trailblazer DX prior to the Dreamforce announcement. And I remember seeing this going, wow, this is something we definitely need to latch onto. And so this is where we actually came in and built into the product this ability to actually surface recommendations, identify issues with all that metadata we've been talking about all day long. We scan each piece of metadata, put it through a scoring rule, and give you an output that gives you an understanding of the issues and recommendations associated to them inside of your org, all aligned with that well-architected framework. And so with that, I think we'll end it there. We've had a great discussion here with Susanna. Really appreciate the time, and appreciate everyone's time taking their time to take a look at what we are discussing today. And we'll open it up for any other questions that we have out there. And I see we've got one. What additional functionality is included in the paid version? So the paid version of Hubbl, so the way we've designed it, if you look at the benchmark report and these 7 insights, each one of them kind of aligns with a piece of functionality inside of Hubbl Diagnostics Essentials. And what you can do is you get access to, for example, the account, case, and opportunity objects. We discussed that, where you get access to that information inside of instead of the free version of the product. When you dig into the full version of the product, you're looking at across all of the objects inside of the org, all of the automation inside of the org, and it gives you that full functionality. You can also see in this tiny screenshot here, there's a set of filters that allows you to filter all of the code by different namespaces. We even allow you to go in and filter the metadata in your org by cloud. So this allows you to dig into, hey, what's happening inside of the automation that's in my Service Cloud, for example, or Sales Cloud, and that's a powerful functionality that people are leveraging as well. Just taking a look at some of the other ones here. I don't see any other questions there. So I think we'll end it there, Susanna.
It looks like we had one more.
Oh, there's
that
one more
just
there?
came
Okay.
in. Yeah. So good question. So the last page, or the screen that we showed, I guess, has a horizontal bar of technical debt. How was that number calculated?
The last screen.
I think maybe the picture of the assessment, or the well-architected tool in Hubbl.
Yes. Okay. Yes. So this bar of technical debt. Yes. So that's a great question. So essentially what we've done is we look at all of the different metadata, and then we look at anti-patterns that are aligned to that individual type of metadata. And then we basically have gone through the matrix of the 4 levels of the well-architected framework and align each of those scoring rule violations against the framework. So how is that bar calculated? It's calculated by looking at metadata issues that we've talked about today. For example, installed packages that are out of date could be classified as technical debt, and that could land in the technical debt bucket there. Whereas if you look at documentation, for example, that's something that plagues a lot of Salesforce orgs, where people aren't putting in things like descriptions of fields and descriptions of the code itself. So that's flagged as a documentation issue, for example. That's a great question.
And now I don't see any other questions.
Okay, thanks for catching that one.
Yeah.
All right. Really appreciate the time. Great conversation. Love all the work that's going on at Well Architected. It's so fun to see the ecosystem growing, and really excited to see where things go next. So yeah, appreciate the time.
So much. Yeah. Thanks everyone for joining. Thanks.
Thanks.